Hello, my dear friends. I hope you're all doing very well. We haven't learned in a while, but here we are continuing Chapter 8 of the Laws of Blessings. And this chapter is a very fundamental chapter in regards to the laws of blessings. Over here, the Rambam is going to be discussing what food, which blessing belongs to that item of food. So in other words, if you're coming to eat and you're not sure what blessing you're supposed to make on what food, watch this class. So, just as a little introduction, just to get us into the understanding of what's going on, generally speaking, there are 6 types of blessings for 6 varieties and styles of food. So, number 1 is the blessing that we make over bread. So that's the first type of blessing, which is called the blessing of hamotzi, which is how we're going to refer to it throughout the rest of this class, is the special blessing that we make over bread. The second blessing is not for bread per se, but rather for a pastry or a cracker, biscuit style, something which is not actually bread, but it's made out of it's made out of flour, of the 5 types of flours that we spoke about, from the five main grains, but it doesn't have just flour and water as its main ingredient, but rather it's a pastry, and therefore it is going to have the blessing of mezonot, which is the blessing that we make over type of pastries. Mezonot means food, pastry, sustenance. So that's the second type of blessing, which is how we're going to refer to it over the rest of this class, mezonot. The third type of blessing is the blessing that we make over any type of vegetable. So if we're going to be eating cucumbers, tomatoes, anything that grows from the ground, but is not bread or a pastry, will have the blessing of ha'adama, which is the blessing on the food of the ground. Now, that's the third blessing. The fourth blessing is also from the ground, but it's not growing on the ground itself, but rather it is growing on a tree. So we're going to have the special blessing for the fruits of the tree. So those are apples, pears, etc. All types of fruits will have the blessing of ha'etz. The blessing of ha'etz, etz in Hebrew literally means tree. So we have the blessing of the fruits of the tree. That's number 4. Number 5 is that in regards to the fruits of the tree, there is a special blessing which is for wine. When we have wine or grape juice, because it's such a specialty, we use it for making a kiddush. Wine as a specialty in Jewish law. So therefore, there's a special blessing that we make over wine, which is the blessing of hagafen. Hagafen means literally the vine. So this is a special blessing which is almost like a sub of the other blessings, but because wine has a specialty for itself, so therefore it's not just going to be regular the blessing of the fruit of the tree, but rather it's going to be the blessing of the fruit of the vine. Then the last blessing, number 6, last but not least, is the blessing on everything else. So that means if you're eating fish, meat, drinking a cup of water when you're thirsty, is all going to have the blessing of shehakol, which literally means everything, because the blessing says how everything was created by God. And that is a blessing that we say over everything else. So these are the 6 blessings. So remember them. Hamotzi is that God creates bread. Mezonot is for pastries. Ha'adama is for the growing from the ground. Ha'etz is growing from the tree. Hagafen is for the vine. And shehakol is for everything else, which is not included in the above mentioned. Are we ready? We're now going to go into this chapter. There are a few details over here. We're going to try to go through this as fast as we can so that we can get the general picture of what food has what blessing. So, most of what we've said over here, the Rambam incorporates within this chapter. We're just going to go through it, and he says that all the fruit that grow on the tree, we start off by saying the blessing of ha'etz, of the tree, and then at the end we make the grace after meal, which is there's a short blessing that we say how we announce how God created everything, and we thank God for it. That includes all types of fruits, except for certain types of fruits which they won't have the same grace after meal. So I'm just going to explain you that there are different types of grace after meals. So if a person is eating bread, so the grace after meal that is going to be saying is going to be the long 4 blessings of full grace after meals, as we've already discussed earlier on. Now, if a person is just eating a pastry, eating a cracker, so on and so forth, so then there's going to be a grace after meal which is going to be geared towards the pastry, this type of sustenance that we're speaking about, which is going to be a shortened version of the long blessing. This shortened version has 3 options. So it's either where we mention about the fruit, the food of, a type of pastry, type of cake, so on and so forth. It's something which is a little bit more sustaining and filling. It's made out of one of the 5 grains, but it's not bread. Second option is in regards to when we drink wine and we make the grace after meal for the wine. So it's not just going to be the short blessing as we're going to see, but rather this is going to be the shortened, condensed version of the long blessing, which is, it's a paragraph. It again is going to be the same as the blessing after that we say for the pastries, but the beginning and the end, we're not going to mention the pastry, but rather we're going to mention the wine. And the last type of food which we say with this blessing as well is going to be if it's one of the 5 special fruits that the land of Israel was blessed with. So we're going to mention in the beginning the idea of the fruits that God blessed Israel, and then also at the end. So if you're a little bit confused, I'm just going to try to sum this up. There is a blessing, there's the long blessing in what we say when we eat bread. So there's 4 long blessings. If it's not bread, in other words, it's just a pastry, or it's wine, or it is one of the 5 fruits that the land of Israel is blessed with, the grace after meal is going to be a condensed version of it, but going to mention whether it's a pastry, whether it is wine, or whether it is the fruits, and that's how we're going to say that blessing. Now, if it's not one of these, and in other words, it's just you ate chicken for dinner, or you drank a cup of water, or something like of that style, so at that point, there's no flour involved, there was no wine, there was no fruits of the land of Israel, so at that point, you're just going to say a short blessing, which is the blessing of Borei Nefashot, which is where we say how God created many creations in the world, and He all gives them sustenance. So these are the types of grace after meals. So this is something which you should have hopefully clear down pat. If it's complicated, you can rewind and look at this again. And so blessings for fruits are going to be the blessing that we make before the blessing of ha'etz, the fruit of the tree. Afterwards, after we're done, then we say the blessing after, which is Borei Nefashot, that short 2-liner, unless it's one of the fruits of the land of Israel, then we're going to make the special blessing. Now, if we're eating any type of food, so that means meat, cheese, fish, eggs, water, milk, honey, and so on. We're just going to make a basic blessing of Borei Nefashot, of Shahakol, before that God created everything, and afterwards we're going to make the blessing of Borei Nefashot, that short blessing after this food. Now, what about if a person takes fruit? And this is where it starts to get a little bit more complicated. And this is how we go. If a person takes a fruit, now the blessing on the fruit, as we say, is the fruit of the tree. Special blessing. But now, you squeeze that fruit, and out comes the liquid. What blessing do we make on this now? Is it counted as fruit, or is it counted as just a liquid? So the answer is it's going to be counted as a liquid, and therefore we're just going to make the blessing of shehakol, that everything that was created by God. We're not going to make the same blessing as the fruits regularly have, because it's only the juice of the fruit, except for two cases. One is in the case of grapes, where we make a special blessing on the wine or grape juice. And the second one is another exception, which is olives. Because these two have a specialty, so therefore olives, we will just make the blessing of the fruit, because the olive oil, or the olive juice rather, and olive oil as well, will have that same specialty as the olive itself. But in any other case, we're just going to be making a blessing on the liquid, which is going to be different than just actual eating the fruit. So too also in regards to a fruit that is, for instance, if you're going to eat a type of vegetable, let's say a potato. Now potatoes are meant to be cooked. We don't eat them raw. So if a person does eat a potato when it's raw, so then you're going to be making not the blessing on the vegetable, because it's not the way the vegetable is supposed to be eaten, unless somehow there is a way that you eat vegetable raw. But generally speaking, if the vegetable is not meant to be eaten that way, you're just going to make the blessing of shehakol. And if it's cooked, then you'll make the proper blessing. Now, if it's a type of fruit that is, let's say, an onion you can eat when it is raw, or you can eat it when it's cooked, or a carrot, or anything else, which can be both ways. So then, of course, you're going to make the blessing, whichever way, the proper blessing on it. How about sugar cane? This is a good question. Sugar cane is, you have a type of it's a type of, grows from the ground, but the liquid of the sugar, what type of blessing do you make on that? Well, now once it becomes sugar, it looks like, little sugars, crystals. What blessing do you make on that? The Rambam says that although there is a discussion about this, and some rabbis will say differently, he says that the blessing that we make on this is shehakol, because it's just like dates. If you have dates that drip out their honey, you make the blessing of shehakol. It's not like the blessing on the tree anymore, because it's just the liquid of the date, and you just make the blessing of shehakol, that the general blessing on everything else. So it also would be in regards to sugar, and that is actually the accepted view. If we eat sugar plainly, we would make that blessing on it. How about spices? Now, spices are not really a food that you eat on your own, because who eats just a spice like that? So therefore, the Rambam says that essentially, if you're just eating a spice, it's not the way of eating food, and therefore there is no blessing for it. And so too also in regards to foods that are not the way they're meant to be, but they're still, you are eating them. So for instance, if you have like a type of bread that has become more moldy, or wine that has become old, more like not really good anymore, food that has spoiled, in such a case, you make the blessing of shehakol, because it's somehow still edible, but it's, I guess you should try to keep away from that. It's not very healthy. But in the case when you do eat from these fruits, so you make the blessing of shehakol. Now, if a person has it takes, if I don't know if you've ever noticed, there sometimes is at the bottom of a bottle of wine that was sitting for a long time, you'll find these like little pieces at the bottom. I forgot what it's called in English, but it's if you take that and you pour water on this, and now it becomes, I guess this taste of wine, so then you would make the blessing of the blessing of wine over this, because it would have that dominant taste of wine. Now, I don't know if you ever do. I don't know if ever, I've never done this, but in case you do, now you know. Now, if a person made the wrong blessing, so let's say a person is eating bread and they make the blessing on the fruit of the tree. Now, bread is not a fruit of a tree, so he's going to have to make a new blessing. Let's say a person is eating an apple, and now they make the blessing of the fruit of the ground. Now, an apple grows on a tree, but the tree comes from the ground, essentially. So therefore, if a person made a blessing of something which grows on a tree, they made the blessing of the fruit of the ground, that's okay, because the tree comes from the ground. But if it's the other way around, if you make a blessing on a potato growing of the blessing of the tree, well, then a potato never grows on a tree, so therefore you would have to make a new blessing. In any case, if a person made the blessing of shahakol, that the blessing where we of everything else, where we say how everything was created by God, on any type of food, in any case, that would be okay. In other words, obviously you shouldn't do it, and you should go find out what the right blessing is. But in the case where by mistake a person has made this blessing, even if it's wine or bread, it's still going to be okay. You can just continue eating. And in any case, if a person is not sure if they made the blessing, so in other words, they're unsure if they made a blessing or not, so then you don't go and make another blessing, because since it is the blessing, the concept of the blessings, except for the grace of after meal, the long grace after meal, is something which was instituted by the rabbis as a way of praising and thanking God. In such a case, if you forgot it, if you're not sure, you just leave it and it's okay. But if you know for a fact that you didn't do it, so then you should definitely make the blessing. So even if you're in the middle of eating, you finish, you swallow what you've had, or if you're able, if it's not going to be, if it's not going to be disgusting to take out from your mouth, but make the blessing and then continue eating. And so that is the idea of the blessings over here. And that is pretty much the concept of blessings. So there are obviously many more details to this, but this is the general gist of it. And I hope you understood it. If you have any questions, please do comment, or you can direct message me, and I will be very happy to answer any questions. It's a very important concept. It's a very basic part of our day, of a Jewish life. When we eat food, we bless God, we thank God for what He gave us, and after we have eaten, we again thank Him for this food. So it's a very important thing, and this is the chapter for today. So all the best. We will, God willing, continue tomorrow with the next chapter. Have a very good one in the meantime.